Grazie Lucrezia, grazie di avermi invitato qui, grazie a CPR, grazie all'Università di Modena. È un gran piacere per me essere qui in Italia, in Modena, ed è qui che cambio all'inglese, perché sono uno delle due intervenenti che parlerà in inglese. Lucrezia said some time ago, in the 90s, all of us on this panel would have been fans of globalization. To a large extent, I continue to be a fan of globalization. The preferred dish at home for my daughters is lasagna. And thanks to globalization, our salads have a sauce that uses aceite de Modena. So when my girls ask me, where are you going? Mom, for your job, I say, I go to Modena, that's where the vinegar comes from that you use in your salads. And these things bring nice things to our life, bring benefits, and benefits that we probably take advantage of every day and that we do not even realize anymore because we have gotten used to them. But in the 90s, we were not only told that trade would be good for consumers, for the quality of the goods we consume, for the variety of goods. We were also told that it would be good for workers. The Sapir report was mentioned before. There was another report, the Cecchini report, that told us that when countries open up, in particular countries that are similar, in particular if you liberalize trade among European countries, this would be good for all economies and it would be good for all workers. And because of these kind of arguments, actually at the time in Europe, trade unions supported free trade. European trade unions supported liberalization of free trade within Europe. Now, those trade unions have to take position on another trade agreement among similar economies, United States, EU, and I hope to hear from André a bit about what kind of position they take now about these kind of questions. Do they still expect that everything is going to be rosy for workers? In fact, opinion polls tell us that many people in Europe do not think that globalization is so great. Europe is one of the regions where people are concerned about inequality and they link globalization to inequality. They believe that free trade, free flows of capital have contributed to inequality. More importantly, in Europe, but also in other regions, including in Asia, fast-growing and globalizing Asia, people may think that trade is good for growth. They also think it's good for employment, but many of them think it's not good for their own job. So they believe the story, it's probably overall okay, but I'm concerned. I'm afraid that I will not take advantage. And policymakers, I believe, increasingly read these opinion polls, hear these voices, and it's probably one of the explanations why in places like Geneva, where I work, negotiations on trade liberalizations have not been very fast, not been very successful in the past years. Now, I've been asked to say something about trade and unemployment, and I will delve a bit more in detail into this, and I will do this by talking a bit about the past and by saying something about the possible future. And speaking about the past, I want to think of two phenomena that I think have been very important and that have hit Europe, mature economies together. It was the opening up of the communist bloc and the liberalization of capital flows. This happened in a time where there was also more general liberalization of trade, but integrating Eastern Europe, integrating China into global markets has been a major shock to the global world, has been a major change. And in the same time, capital was liberalized, so it was not only possible to start buying from China what was produced in China, it was possible to invest in China, produce in China with cheap labor, but using the technologies that we were using in Europe or the United States. So you would get a very strong hit very rapidly. Competition was fierce because you had workers there with high levels of productivity using modern technologies, but being paid much lower wages. I believe these two phenomena that happened in the late 80s, in the 90s, have been very important and have been affecting, created a big wave of adjustment in economies like the United States and in European economies. Interestingly, economies have adjusted to this at different moments in time, and I will come back to that later. What has this done to labor markets? It has, first of all, put a lot of pressure on the jobs of low-skilled workers, because they were competing most directly with workers in regions like China. It has led to a lot of change and rapid change, so a big need to adjust in the way you position yourself. And entrepreneurs have reacted to this differently. Some saw it coming and adjusted before things actually happened. Others were slow, had to close down, lost business, adjusted afterwards, but adjustment was needed. And one of the issues that is affecting workers, people, individuals, is that because of the change of capital, of this mobility of capital, we have to now be very careful about how we tax capital. Because if we tax capital too much, it will leave. It will go to Switzerland. And if it leaves, then it doesn't produce in our countries anymore. So there was pressure to reduce taxation on capital, and we have seen the taxation burden shift onto labor. So workers have had a harder time to find jobs, have had pressures on their wages, and increased pressure to take some of their wages away through taxation. And what we have seen in many countries is an increase in inequality. So this is not so funny. For some time, we researchers, well educated, we thought, yeah, that's for the low skilled, we can write about this. Fortunately, it doesn't concern us. But when I'm going to talk about the future, which I will start doing now, I think that this future will be increasingly difficult also for those with higher levels of education. First of all, one thing is already happening with technological change and FDI. We see that a lot of jobs that can easily be done abroad, that are codifiable, that you can easily control from far away, they're already been moved further away to India, for instance, jobs like programming, accountancy work, even if they are high skilled. So we have seen that thanks to technology, it's not only the low skilled that are feeling the competition from abroad, it's also the higher skilled. So we see that what we once thought to be protected jobs seem not to be that protected anymore. That's one issue. Another challenge is that those emerging economies, even the developing economies, they have invested an awful lot in education in the past years. Simulations predict that within 15 years, India will be the country producing the highest number of people with a university degree. So we cannot expect to continue to be the countries of the skilled workers. Soon this will be India. Soon this will be China, with China having the only disadvantage that they've had this one-child policy, and therefore the number of young people coming into the labor market will slow down. So we may not continue to have this advantage of being highly endowed with skills. And last but not least, those countries that are emerging now, they want to become mature. They are already moving up the value chain. They are already moving up into the high-tech industries. 1 or 2 weeks ago, I learned that through a merger in China, now the largest global producer of high-speed trains has been created. It's now not anymore Siemens from Germany, my country. It's a Chinese company that will be the biggest competitor in global markets for this terribly high technology product. And things like this will continue to happen. So when I think about the future, I think that pressure will continue to be high, that it will be of a somewhat different nature, and that when it comes to labor markets, pressure will be everywhere. For the low skilled, for the middle skilled, for the high skilled. So if we want to find good and interesting job for our children and our grandchildren, we have to come up with very clever reactions and very clever technology and very clever policies. What do these policies look like, these potential policies? Here I will want to give some examples, not coming from the institution I work for, but coming from the global debate on these issues. One example comes from Turkey. Turkey is currently holding the presidency of the G20, and they have put their presidency under the motto of the 3 I's. Infrastructure, implementation, and inclusiveness. I would like to say something about infrastructure. So a country like Turkey, a country like China, is very aware of the fact that they have to make huge investments in infrastructure. A lot of policy goes in that direction. And one of the, I found interesting things that happened when I was in Washington 2 weeks ago is that in a meeting with local representatives, one of the Turkish speakers said, I know that in Turkey we have a problem with infrastructure, that we have to do something. But now that I've traveled through your country, United States, I think you have a problem too. Your airports and your roads are not at all up to date. And I think that United States is not the only mature economy facing that problem. Another issue that is very much in the debate is the issue of access to finance. If you want to change, if you have to adjust, you often have to make new investments. And financial markets have been a bit upset in recent years, and because of that, financial regulation has changed. Now, in the discussions on small and medium-sized enterprises in the B20, we hear a lot of complaints about the access of finance by small and medium-sized enterprises. And there is a fear that the new rules from Basel will make it very difficult, increasingly difficult for small firms to get lending, to get credits in order to make investments. And I don't know whether that was among Filippo's speaking points, but if this is an issue being debated here, I would be very curious to hear what your views on this are. Last but not least, 2 themes that come up frequently are the ones that were mentioned also by a previous speaker, R&D and human capital, investments in human capital, investment in R&D. One of the challenges there will be that it's increasingly acknowledged that we probably will have to seek for public-private collaborations on these matters. But getting those private and public collaborations right without falling into problems of capture, of lobbying, of doing what your biggest company wants you to do, even if it's not the most important thing for your city or for your region, that's very challenging. Policymakers have often gotten that wrong in the past. So designing those policies well will be challenging. It will not only be challenging to design them well, but also to introduce them at the right moment in time and to start thinking about change in time. And here I want to conclude with some numbers about change. In a country like mine, Germany, we lost 7 percentage points of jobs in manufacturing in the 1990s. When the wall opened, the borders to the east opened, the adjustment had to happen very quickly. 7 percentage point of jobs went. South Korea faced a similar situation in the 90s, Japan too. All these 3 countries are currently net exporters in manufacturing to China. There are not many countries who are net exporters to China. In France, manufacturing jobs reduced only by 1.5 percentage point. Same thing in Italy in the 1990s. While now in the 2000s in South Korea, employment in manufacturing even increased. In Germany, things have stabilized. In countries like France and Italy, pressure on manufacturing continues to exist. I don't know whether what has happened in Germany will prove to be the right thing in the long run. Currently, the country seems to be doing well. And indeed, when you look at things from a business perspective, it's often better to be at the tester, at the head of the change, as you want to be in Modena, rather than to wait and get hit by the need to change too late. So with this, I would like to stop with this message of it's not necessarily positive, but hopefully also not too negative about what the globalization will continue to bring for us.
So your message is your message is that things are usually right in Germany, right? I mean, at least
no, I have to react to it. Okay. I've spent my whole life listening to that we have done everything wrong. So I'm enjoying this period. And we even won the World Championship.
Okay. Let's see. Andre, please.
Okay, let's not brag about